This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. So this news came across everybody's feed that Vita is available for trade, and inevitably somebody asked me, hey, should the Cleveland Browns entertain trading for Vita? And this story and that question itself has a lot of thread to pull on that I thought was interesting enough for me to sit down in this chair and maybe record a little video for y'all. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Should the Browns trade for Vita? The answer is no, the Browns shouldn't trade for Vita. And despite the amount of respect and love I have for Vita as a football player, I respect him greatly. If the Browns traded for Vita, it might actually piss me off. I'll explain that in further detail in just a minute, but first I do have to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 sports pick app. The app is really easy to use for player picks. Just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. That's it. Rather just pick teams, PrizePicks has that now too. Just pick the winner, spread, or total in any game or fight. PrizePicks is available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. Plus, you can even follow me on the app at Quen_C. Tell my picks, one click, and follow your friends too. Best of all, play your first $5 and get $150 in lineups if you win. Just use the promo code HMA when you sign up. That's right. PrizePicks just switched up their offer, so there's no better time to join. Lock in and win with that first lineup. That's code HMA at sign up to get $150 in bonus lineups if you win with your first $5 or up lineup. Why would trading for a two-time Pro Bowler, a Super Bowl champion, one of the best defensive players, defensive tackles, of the last 5 years, why would that make me mad at the Browns traded for him? I think the answer is fairly obvious. One, Vita is a nose tackle. The Browns last year, they traded a nose tackle for like a 7th-round pick, indicating that they don't really think that they have a use for a nose tackle. So if then we trade a bunch of picks to get a nose tackle, even if it's the best nose tackle, it's going to annoy me because we already had a nose tackle on the roster, but we made the decision that that's not where this team is going. So it's just further zigzagging of directions that doesn't make me confident, right? The other reason I think is fairly obvious. Once you traded Myles Garrett, you said you were betting on the future, right? You might not be tanking. I know a lot of people have jumped to tanking. I don't think they're tanking. You might not be completely, out of the idea of winning games this year, even though I think you have to imagine you win less games without Myles Garrett this year. Like if Myles Garrett went down for the season, we would probably be like, oh, the Browns are going to have a pretty rough season. Now the Browns replaced him with Jared Verse, which makes it a little bit different, but there's still a downgrade there from Myles to Jared Verse. So you have to assume, internally the projections are down for what they thought they would be this year from what they thought they would be before the Myles trade. But once you traded Myles Garrett, you are saying we are committing to the future. We are committing to the 26 and under guys on this roster. We are building towards something later in the line. And look, I know Browns fans have had their patience exhausted over the last 20, 30 years. But if you're going to sell me that the team is going in a direction, then by God, go in that direction, right? Don't try to sell me that, hey, we're getting younger, we're going towards the future, we're going to get better in the future, but also we're going to trade some of our draft assets to get a 31-year-old nose tackle in here. My dislike of a potential trade for Vita has nothing to do with my opinion of Vita. It is what a trade for Vita says about how confused the Cleveland Browns would be if they were to make a move like that. Now, I don't think they're going to make a move because I don't think they're that confused about where things are headed. I think some fans are in a confusing place, right? Where they want the team to be as good as possible. So they see Vita Vea's available. So they want the Browns to go get him. But also kind of are vaguely aware that the Browns do have this long-term plan that they're committed to, right? Like, you're always, as a fan, balancing what would be for the best for the team right now versus what you think is going to be better for long-term. And if you're somebody who is not bought in on Andrew Berry, the more than likely you're going to want the short-term fixes because you don't trust the long-term vision with Andrew, right? Like, how you feel about this trade kind of just, I think it reflects, if you really want the Browns to trade for Vita Vea, it's probably because you don't think much of Andrew Berry, right? You don't think much of his ability as a GM. If you're like me and you're a little bit more like, hey, if you're going to do this plan, at least commit to it, then you still have some faith that Andrew Berry can do his job well. And I think the last two drafts have demonstrated that enough for me to want to see this plan through. But yeah, if you trade for a 31-year-old Vita Vea, that kind of just gives the game away. That tells everybody right there that you have no idea what you're doing as a team, what direction you're going, right? I use this term to talk about like the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I went on a whole rant in my Q&A, or I think it was hot takes, about the Steelers and what people get wrong about what they want to avoid being with the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of people get caught up in the fact that the Steelers make the playoffs every year and go, oh, the worst thing you could be is the Steelers. And they're really fixated on the win total, right? Oh, the worst thing you could be is a team that wins 10 games or 9 games like the Steelers. That is ridiculous. Winning 9 or 10 games is absolutely the furthest thing away from the worst thing that could happen to you, right? The problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers is that they're directionally confused as an organization. They are spending money at the highest level for players who are older while also not wanting to commit to players who could take them over the top. They are committed to winning 10 games. That's the difference, right? If you were putting every resource you had into winning 10 games in one season, that's not a great idea. If you just happen to win 10 games in a season, that's not the worst thing that can happen, right? The Steelers are directionally confused, which is why they've been at a plateau for almost a decade now. The Browns have been a directionally confused franchise since they come back in 99. I've seen this team fluctuate from we're rebuilding. No, we're actually trying to be good this year. We're going to sign Willie McGinnis. We're rebuilding. This and that. Just fluctuate. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It's the most annoying thing in the world to watch this football team go from direction to direction here. So if the Browns, after committing to, building this team up for the future, rebuilding, and rolling into a new young core, right? The Browns' goals are for 2027 and 2028. This season is for marking improvement, for building culture, and setting a baseline. I do not expect the Browns to be a playoff team this year. I don't intend to watch the Browns as if they should be a playoff team this year. The way I intend on watching the Browns this year is in the same way a scientist would watch an experiment. Okay? Just because the Browns aren't going to win the championship this year or have no hopes to win the championship this year doesn't mean that the season can't be interesting. Some of the most interesting seasons have been when the Browns haven't even made the playoffs. Right? Everybody thinks fondly of 2018. They didn't make the playoffs. They weren't even 500 that year. But it was a fun watch because we were watching kind of like scientists, kind of like, watching an experiment, right? What are these young players going to give us, right? We're putting these young players into a box and we're seeing what they cook up. That is what this season is about. I'm not going to get too caught up into their win-loss record this year. I'm not going to live or die with the Browns win-loss record this year. I think that's the thing that people have to kind of cope with. Once you traded Miles, all this win-loss record stuff, it matters less, right? Miles was the piece that you felt like you had to utilize and get the most wins out of because you can't waste the talent like that. Well, you already traded him. So now the view of the season is different. The way that we're going to look at this season is different. The way that we're going to enjoy this season is different, right? The last few years, the end of the season has been brutal because we have had legitimate playoff hopes, whether they be justified or not. But going into 2024, legitimate playoff hopes. Going into 2023, legitimate playoff hopes, right? And made the playoffs in 2023. 2021, 2022, for a long time, we had consistent hopes to make the playoffs and maybe even do more. That's not the case this year. This year, if the Browns make the playoffs, awesome. Going to be happy. It's going to be ahead of schedule, right? It's going to be something that you can only really be happy with because they're not supposed to make the playoffs this year. This year is about watching this young talent grow. I want to win some games along the way. I would love to win some statement games, but ultimately if this team is under 500 this year, it's not going to crush me because this year isn't about making the playoffs. This year's about making sure that you have a great baseline to make that leap next year when you invest in some key positions. We know what those positions are. So why in the world would you go and get Vita Vea? What does getting Vita Vea help you accomplish? You get Vita Vea because the goal of the season is to win games. You get Vita Vea because the goal of the season is to win a championship or to make the playoffs. You don't trade for Vita Vea when you're a team like Cleveland and your goal is to see what these young players got. How are you going to evaluate Mason Graham if you take responsibility away from him when you're supposed to be evaluating him? How do you evaluate Mike Hall if you trade for Vita Vea? Vita Vea is 31 years old. If this team wants to be good in 2028, well, Vita Vea ain't going to be on the team. So what good is it to know that Vita Vea is still good at football? It would be fun, but it wouldn't serve a purpose for this team. And the one thing I do appreciate from Andrew Berry that other GMs of the Browns have not done is Andrew has been successful at avoiding this kind of stuff, right? When it's time to let young players develop, he does not fall into the trap of getting a veteran in there to mess it up. He lets that player grow. He does a good job with that. And you can shit on Andrew Berry all you want. He's overseen an era of Cleveland Browns football where I've seen the most young talent develop in my history of watching the Browns since 99. You want to argue about some stuff before 1999? Sure. But from 99 on, we've seen more young talent develop, whether he drafted them or not, under Andrew Berry's run. And get retained too, right? Not just young talent that shows a spark for a year, but young talent that gets a second contract. We've seen more of that from Andrew Berry than we've seen from any other GM. And that's why he's definitely the longest reigning GM since 99. I think he deserves that title. Now, if he goes much further than that, that's going to be dependent on what he does these next two off seasons. Well, this offseason and next offseason, right? How this draft looks once we get some football actually getting played, and then what he does to try to solve some of the bigger problems on the roster. Again, we know what those are. So, yeah, Andrew has more work to do. He's not the greatest GM of all time or anything. But I've lived through enough bad GMs to know that, he's better than what we've had on a consistent basis. So with this situation popping up, no, this is not something the Browns should do. Now, I do think it's interesting, right? Because part of why Vita Vea wants to leave is because he can't get a new deal. And part of why Vita Vea can't get a new deal is because the Buccaneers are contemplating whether to pay Baker Mayfield or not, which is interesting, right? A lot of history has gotten rewritten with the whole Baker Mayfield thing because the Browns had Deshaun Watson and, Baker Mayfield basically became the baby face in that story. And because Baker Mayfield became the baby face in that story, they got to rewrite that story in their image. But what people forget is that the tension that threw off 2021 started well before Baker ever tore that labrum. It was because Baker wasn't getting the contract. And the Browns had made it pretty clear they have no plans to sign him long term. And it seems like the Buccaneers are kind of doing the same thing the Browns have, right? And the reason the Browns let go of Baker Mayfield was because they did not deem him as somebody worthy of paying a number 1 overall pick extension. I don't think that evaluation was wrong. I think, unfortunately for the Cleveland Browns, they were right about the valuation on Baker Mayfield, but wrong about their evaluation of Deshaun Watson, which, to be fair, nobody saw coming. Like, anybody acting like they saw it coming, they're lying. Okay? They're lying. I remember the conversations when the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson. I remember what people were sending me when the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson, because I was not somebody that was the most excited about it. But people were telling me, oh, yeah, he's this, that, he's the dude. Like, everybody definitely felt differently about Deshaun 3 years ago than they felt now, right? The conversation was this worth it morally? Not, was this worth it on a football level? But that's where the Browns made their mistake. They were right about their evaluation of Baker Mayfield. Unfortunately, their solution of trading for Deshaun Watson blew up in their face. So, kind of made them look like assholes. Hey, look like Wile E. Coyote trying to catch the road runner, right? Meet. You know what I mean? It is what it is. But now, fast forward, and we're at the end of this Deshaun Watson saga. This is his last year on contract. And Baker Mayfield's kind of in the same fork in the road. Is he going to get a long-term deal from the Buccaneers? You would think he's been good enough to warrant some kind of long-term extension if you're Tampa Bay, especially given that they have no young quarterback to pivot to on the roster. But this is pretty long for a contract negotiation to go on for a quarterback, especially given that Baker has already said that he just doesn't even want to negotiate it anymore until the end of the season. So now we're talking about this getting into a unrestricted free agency. That's peculiar. That's interesting. I would have thought Baker would have got his deal, would have got his money, his long-term deal this summer, and this would be nothing. But Tampa Bay's a little hesitant. And their hesitancy is kind of causing Vita Vea to be like, yo, what's up? And now Vita Vea's available. It's a fascinating situation. It's going to be a fascinating season to pay attention to. But that's my thoughts on this. No, the Browns should not trade for Vita Vea because the Browns are already committed to rebuilding. If you traded Myles Garrett, but then traded for Vita Vea, that would make me want to go up to Berea and strangle Andrew Berry. Because what are we doing? What if we want it to be good, we should have just kept Myles. But you decided that you want to rebuild, you want to replenish, get the young talent in here. You thought the Jared versus age mattered. Okay, cool. Okay, that's what you're selling me. Cool. If that's the case, though, you can't trade for no Vita Vea. You got to stick with the young guys. You got to get the young defensive tackles that you drafted every chance to shine. And you really don't even need Vita Vea. You're not going to be in a position to use a nose tackle. Vita Vea is still a nose tackle. And you traded Juwan Brooks last year because he was a nose tackle when you had no use for him. You thought Aiden Huntington would be more useful. So commit to that. Like, I'm not saying you got to go back, but, oh, we were wrong about this. Like, I think that keeping Aiden Huntington's fine. I wasn't one of those people that was upset about that trade. But if you go and trade Vita Vea, you telling me that you was wrong and that you don't believe in what you're doing. And then now you're going to piss me off. You know what I mean? So, yeah, no. As much as I love Vita Vea, he don't belong in Cleveland. But I hope Vita Vea does go somewhere where he's happy. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.